to me to have to come up to Coda's really wonderful PowerPoint. Anyway, get stuck into it. I'm going to be talking, as I said, about underwater conservation surveys and how the results of those can actually help you formulate proper management plans for underwater cultural heritage sites. Since the topic is World War II underwater cultural heritage in the Asia Pacific region, I'm going to be talking about the conservation surveys that we took on World War II sunken vessels in Chuk Lagoon to illustrate how we can use these surveys to protect this cultural heritage resource. So, submerged World War II cultural heritage can give us quite a lot of information, archaeological, historical, technological, social and scientific information about that particular period. It also can support marine ecosystems themselves. There's commercial opportunities surrounding these wreck sites, such as the diving tourism dollar, and also we can use the sites for educational and public programs. Some of the issues or disadvantages of these sites is the unexploded ordnances on the sites that can then be used for dynamite fishing, or they make their own, and because their ecosystems in themselves, there's a lot of fish on these particular sites, so they're targets for dynamite fishing. And also in areas that are protected, they become, because of the number of fish, they can, lead to illegal fishing practices. However, I think the pros ultimately outweigh the cons, and therefore protecting this cultural resource into the future is vitally important. So the future of maritime archaeology has been sort of moving towards in situ management over the last 10 years or so. And that means diving conservators and specialists actually play an increasingly important part in developing suitable management programs for underwater archaeological sites. And one of the most important ways in which we do this is by performing on-site conservation surveys on the sites. The main aim of these on-site conservation surveys is to gather as much environmental, physical and chemical information as possible on a site, so that the major degradative forces can be assessed. Generally factors such as water temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, pH levels, redox potentials, the depth of submergence, the amount of turbulence, the extent of marine growth, the material composition and burial history, if it's buried, actually affects the rate at which a wreck will degrade. By measuring these parameters, then we can sort of start to characterise a particular site with respect to its aggressiveness towards the materials that make up that particular site. In addition, the information that we gain from measuring corrosion parameters provides an understanding of the mechanism of corrosion that's occurring on the site and the way in which these are degrading. For example, if you measure the pH and the corrosion potential of the residual metal surface, this basically gives us an understanding of the chemical state of the metal, which will assist in determining the extent of deterioration and the structural integrity of the site. So if you monitor these corrosion parameters at regular intervals over an extended period of time, then it's possible to predict a corrosion rate. And with a corrosion rate, then we can estimate the longevity of the site And then from that assists us in establishing, effective management plans for those particular sites. So we're going to talk about Chuuk. During World War II, a significant portion of the Japanese fleet was actually based in Chuuk Lagoon. And in February 1944, the USA commenced a major strike called Operation Hailstone on this Japanese base. And they obliterated the fleet and sunk more than 65 military and armed merchant vessels and hundreds of aircraft. So these submerged sites are a significant part of the World War II history and are listed as a USA National Historic Landmark in Micronesia. They attract huge amounts of colonising organisms, sponges, tunicates, which then attract a lot of fish. They actually support their own ecosystems. They're not just fish attractants. And of course, because of this and the mere size of them and that, they're also listed as some of the best dive sites in the world. So over a 5-year period, from 2002 to 2008, a series of on-site conservation surveys were performed on selected sites in Chuuk Lagoon. But 3 sites that I've chosen are the Onimaru, the Suzuki Patrol Boat, and the Tonawas Dock Boat. There's several main issues that are intrinsically linked with losing the protective concretion layer on iron vessels that accelerate the corrosion of the sites. One of them is dynamite fishing, so which obviously there's a risk to the fish, that's the point, but that also removes the concretion layers that you can see in that middle picture there, and increases the corrosion rate, and of course it's dangerous for any humans that are in the water at that time as well. Inappropriate mooring practices, so actually where the boats tie up directly to the site, so that you can see in both of those that it's basically rubbing away the metal, taking away the concretion and increasing the corrosion. There's also damage by divers, so there's looting, there's rearrangement of artefacts, but the actual fact that they sit on the surfaces of the ships themselves actually kills the encrusting organisms and takes away the concretion, thus increasing the corrosion rate. And of course then you have the natural phenomenon like typhoons and that, which we can't control, but they obviously can remove a lot of the concretion, and if a site itself is relatively weak, so there's very little residual metal, you can get collapse during these periods of high water movement. But one of the other major issues of this increased corrosion is the potential threat of oil pollution. There's already evidence of slow leaks from some of the vessels, such as the Onimaru, which you can see there in the bottom right. However, currently it's not known exactly how much oil and other petrochemicals are actually on these sites. However, if the vessels collapse or the hulls are perforated through increased corrosion rates, any residual oil that's released has the potential to affect the environment, and dependent on the amount, it could be catastrophic for the marine ecology and then of course the community of Chuuk. So in 2000, Dr. Bill Jeffrey initiated a project to record the natural and cultural attributes of the terrestrial and underwater cultural heritage sites in Chuuk Lagoon. And in doing so, We could ascertain the site values and management requirements, and therefore, actually put together more effective and timely management plans for these sites. So the aims and objectives are here of the actual project. But I think the most important one was that the project actually provided funding for the local historic preservation office staff, so that they could actually, once we had trained them and they had their equipment, that they could actually continue monitoring their sites themselves. So in 2002 we commenced the first systematic in-situ conservation surveys of the vessels to assess their extensive deterioration. So what we wanted to do was actually determine the rate of corrosion through collecting in-situ corrosion parameter data over regular intervals over a period of time, assess the structural integrity of the sites, and then with all that information attempt to predict their structural lifespan. We were then going to recommend strategies to decrease corrosion and structural collapse, and then assist the local HPO to apply for funding to implement the recommendations. So 18 sites were actually surveyed between 2002 and 2008, and some of these sites were measured a number of times over this 5-year period to get the longitudinal data so that we could calculate the corrosion rates. But I'm only going to concentrate on the Onimaru, Suzuki and Tonawa stockboat. We chose the Fujikawa because it's really large. It's a huge vessel. It's got a really large depth range too. It spans from 6 metres down to 40 metres. It is one of the most popular dive sites in the lagoon. It's also known that dynamite fishing has occurred on the site. And you can see there's a lot of data, so we have a lot of representative data from this site. So it's statistically significant. The Suzuki patrol boat, chose this one because it's smaller, it's shallower, but it's still dived quite often. It also had known dynamite fishing events occur on the site, also had quite a lot of measurements taken. And then we chose the Tonawa dock boat as a control because it was in a medium depth range, but it had only been discovered in 2006. Divers don't frequent the site, and it hasn't had any dynamite fishing, as you can tell by that huge coral there. It's about 3 times my height. And I'm not going to go into this, I just wanted to scare you a bit. But this is many weeks of data plotting like this, with over 100 measurements for each site, all different ways, and interpreting the data, and I'm going to give you the conclusions, not lots of those. So what we found was the Onimaru was corroding 40% quicker than predicted. And that was because it's actually in a shipping lane, so there's lots of extra water movement over that site. 2, the wrecks are really large, so it gets lots of fish. So it actually, people love to dynamite fish there during that time. And then it's also the most often visited dive site on Tube. So it has a lot of diver interference. Oh, sorry. With the Suzuki, it was corroding 17% faster. And that basically because of the dynamite fishing and the fact that it's shallow, so they put a lot of novice divers on that site. They tend to have problems with their buoyancy at the beginning, so they knock a lot of they hold on to the sites a lot. And the other thing is they use it as a night dive where people actually knock things off as well because you can't see. And then we've got the Tonawa dock boat, who is actually corroding 20% less than it's predicted corrosion rate, because it's pristine and it's never been dived, so it doesn't have the effect of dynamite fishing or diver interference or anything like that. So divers and dynamite fishing actually do have quite a significant effect on the corrosion rates of these sites. So we made some recommendations that permanent moorings actually be put on the more popular dive sites. For the less frequented sites, that they actually use sand, you know, or they're more off-site and not tie up to the sites. You know, improved policing of the legislation. I mean, it is, and it was at that time, illegal to dynamite fish, but people still did it. But according to Bill, you know, that it's lessened now and it's not as often. Basically educating the diving tourism industry about, look, don't touch, maybe not moving artefacts around and getting people to sit on the actual coral and the decks. And also then you can go into cathodic protection using anodes as sacrificial anodes that can then slow down the corrosion rates, and you would put that on really endangered sites or the ones that have got oil on them, but that has a very large commercial, you know, monetary sort of issue attached with that, because that you have to change them, so it's quite expensive to do that. So there's similar projects going on in Saipan, which Kota and myself have been involved in, where they're doing biological surveys, the usual 3D, doing conservation surveys, the photogrammetry and public programs, and we're looking at how the sites are degrading over time. So the initial survey was done in 2012, then we went back this year in 2017. You can see there's a bit of difference between those two. And we think what happened is that Saipan had a huge typhoon go through, I think 2015, I think, maybe, yeah, around there. We think that it just disintegrated because of that. And then, of course, Guam with Bill, you know, we've set up this also monitoring program. So we were here in 2010 and took some corrosion measurements, and we're back again taking measurements again on the same sites so we can look at corrosion rates. So hopefully more of these multifaceted projects for monitoring the degradation of these sites will be implemented. So we've got Chuk, we've got Saipan, we've got Guam, and hopefully we can get some more going so that we can make informed decisions about how we protect these sites and that are suitable for each specific site. So hopefully we can keep going. Thank you. Am I? Yes? I don't know, because I'm not the timekeeper.
I'm the timekeeper. Oh, we have a little time to take a few questions if it's okay. Yeah. Okay.
In time, maybe in a short amount of time, just underwater wrecks may corrode.
Correct. And any amount of conservation will just delay the inevitable, which is total corrosion. So my question is are the governments of Micronesia, Guam, or Saipan, CNMI, or is part of your research ultimately will come up to a recommendation to these governments to have total ban on access to these wrecks for their conservation, number one, and number two, for safety?
Well, from my point of view, that's not the recommendations that I would do. From my point of view, that all I can do is say this wreck may last this long, and that's it. Then it's up to the archaeologists to discuss it with the governments. It will come to the stage if there's penetration diving like we have in Western Australia, where some of our sites we've banned penetration diving because of that, because of the issues with safety. It's not banning the site, you know, visitation to the site completely, so it might just be in steps sort of thing. But the other side of the coin is these sites will degrade. It would just depend on, I think, from my point of view, the effect that it's going to have on the environment. If something is full of oil and it degrades and then it falls apart and then releases this, that's an issue. If a site is safe and it degrades, that's you know, sometimes what happens. I suppose the problem is though, how much of the community sort of income relies on these particular sites being intact is another thing that has to be taken into account.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, Vicki, while you're doing the training here in Guam the next few weeks, would you be able to assess and recommend at the Amtrak, at Agate, conservation methods, whether we could consider putting anti-corrosive instruments on that? This is to recommend to the Park Service Press, because we're in charge of that.
Give me a break. From Saipan, I haven't even looked at the data from Saipan at the moment, so once I get back and I'll do that, then I'll look at Guam, but yes, then I'll be able to say, the Amtrak's actually a perfect site where you could probably easily put on some zinc anodes, because then you can bury those and they still work. If you bury aluminium, it doesn't work anymore. So you can bury those so they don't get pinched, you know, and can connect them. So it's actually, and it's so small, I think it would be perfect, because it's in a protected area too, isn't it? Yeah, sort of, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.